Hi, I'm Kate.
And I'm Mandy, and this is Love Sober,
the podcast for the sober and sober curious.
Hi there, and welcome back to Love Sober, the podcast for the sober and sober curious. And this week I am so delighted finally to be speaking with Lebentz, who is the founder of Trauma Thrivers and a therapist and a TED speaker and many things, and just someone that's been a great support to me personally and just a huge inspiration in terms of changing the conversation around trauma and our understanding of it. So we always start, Lou, by just saying hi and checking in. So how are you doing today?
Good. Thank you. And thank you. I'm glad that we finally got there, because I know we've had this penciled in for a while. Yeah. And I just want to warn you, man, I couldn't get rid of the dog. So if anybody hears any barking or shuffling in the background, I'm afraid that's what it is. But so delighted to be here. And thank you. That's a very kind intro.
Oh, yeah. Well,
quite touched.
Oh, don't. Well, get me started already. So, yeah, we always sort of start the podcast by talking a little bit about your journey, into being alcohol free and your sobriety, and sort of what led you to that part of your story.
Oh God,
I guess.
How long have you got? How can I do it succinctly? I think I've been alcohol free now. I never actually put a free date down, which is, I know, unusual. I see lots of people kind of going, I'm this amount of years or this date or that date. And I don't know why, but for some reason I didn't note it. But I remember being sober on my 40th birthday. So I think I was late 30s and I'm now 54. So I think I've been alcohol free for 15 years.
Wowza.
Yeah. So too long to remember actually what it was like drinking, although it was always very messy. And I had quite an interesting voyage into sobriety. I don't tell this story very often, but I think there's nothing like being, I'm using this as a bit of a confessional, man. So I realised I was alcohol dependent when I was at the Priory already as an addictions therapist. So when I started at the Priory, I thought that my issues were food, codependency, and relational trauma. And I didn't think that a bottle of wine a night was unusual. And I think that because I came from a background of kind of rag trade and then radio and media, and we all used to drink, and so 3 or 4 glasses of wine a night was perfectly normal. And then I remember, I was at the Priory on the addiction unit for about 10 years. And I remember my first year assessing a woman called Jane, she was. And she sat in my office and I said, how much are you drinking? What's going on? Can you tell me the story? And she said, well, some nights I'm drinking a bottle and then at other times I can leave half a bottle in the fridge. And I went, well, I'm drinking that amount. What does that mean about me? And I remember being absolutely devastated because I thought I was going to lose my job. And I was going to have to give it all up. And I went and talked to other therapists and other addictions people and said, listen, I really think that I've got an issue with alcohol as well. I'm going to have to stop. And so that was my breakthrough. But it was brought about by an alcoholic stepfather trying to get him into recovery in my early 30s. It was brought about by many trips to the Philippines or Champneys or Thailand, fasting here, giving up that, stopping that. And it was brought about really by, at 24, I was given a wake-up call of trying to stop drinking then and admitted to a psychiatric hospital. But then I kind of fell asleep again and I forgot about that for the next 10, 12 years.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I think it was the Temper, like Holly Whitaker's work. They did a study that says that it takes about 10 years from the first time someone contemplates it or thinks about or notices there might be an issue until they actually sort of get a sustainable recovery. Which certainly maps my journey. I think, the first time I questioned it was when I was about 23. You know.
Me too, because I was not drinking normally even then, whatever normal is. And I think we have this picture, don't we, sometimes of alcoholic or alcohol dependent, and I prefer the word alcohol dependent because I think there's mild and moderate and major. And, the major is, that picture of waking up in the morning or drinking at lunchtime. And, that's not the prerequisite, is it, for being dependent on alcohol? It's not even about the amount that you drink. It's about how you feel and what you're using the alcohol for. And I was always using alcohol, as I was codependency and other things like food, to try and manage my trauma and to try and push down my emotions.
Yeah, and as soon as you wrote that down, like I wrote down alcohol dependent, and I was like, gosh, that feels better, like hearing that, because it's like, okay, but being able to put it on a gradient scale, being able to put it, as something that had an impact, but, not lumping it all in one box.
I was a shimmier. I used to say shimmy. It was a bit like, it's quite rare to find somebody who is dependent on just one thing. So I think many of us use a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of the other to try and manage our state, and it's about balancing that shimmying, isn't it, between all the different things that we use to try and keep hold of our trauma or what's underneath it.
So if you mentioned sort of being admitted when you were was it 24? So taking things back a little bit further, if you don't mind,
I don't mind
talking about the what was underneath it for you then, and then what happened when you were 24.
Okay, well, I think I didn't realize at 24, and I didn't even realize at 36 that I had trauma. Or that trauma was underneath it. And actually, I spent quite a long time thinking that addiction was addiction, not thinking that addiction was a symptom of something underlying it. And I had, I think I've added it up, about 10 or 12 traumas prior to 21. The worst one and the earliest one was when I was 4 and I was sexually abused by the babysitter, and that kind of led me off on a path of, I don't know, just that whole self-abuse, self-negating, of yourself, and then all the other traumas added on top of that, if you like. So I got to being 21, 22, and was just, the drinking was out of control. And I was working for a company called Joe Bloggs Jeans, and I was at the Birmingham NEC at a clothes show exhibition, and there were some models and dancers on the stage there, and they allegedly actually spiked me, and I didn't find out till years later, but I was spiked with LSD. And then that night, coming back to London, I started to get really, really hypermanic, and then 2 days later, an ambulance arrived and admitted me to a psychiatric hospital in Epsom, which is now turned into a block of flats, would you believe? So it's no longer where a friend of mine actually lives, which is even more bizarre.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's very funny. And so I was admitted with a psychotic break. But actually looking back, it was the most amazing thing that ever happened to me. I walked around Richmond upon Thames for about 24 hours and overnight, having the most florid visions. And actually it sounds awful, and it probably was at the time, but those visions kind of saved me in a way, because when I started to look back at it 10 years later, I realized that some of those visions actually came true. Sounds absolutely mad and crazy, I know, but it was not great at the time, but it was really good, as I say, some years later. And I tried to get into alcohol recovery about 25, and I started reading about psychology and therapy, and I think I read Eric Byrne, Layman's Guide to Psychiatry and Psychoanalysis, about 25, and I knew that stuff was going on. But I then went and worked at Capital Radio, and I started drinking again, and I set up Heart 106.2 in London and did all the events and parties in the park, and then I was off. And it wasn't until my early 30s when I was called out to a mountaintop in Umbria in Italy with an alcoholic stepfather, and I had to nurse him and get him back into treatment in the UK, that looking at the horror of his alcoholism and what was going on, that the light bulb again started to go, oh dear, I think there's really something here going on that you need to look at.
And so how did you get from the media into therapy? What was...
I went via personal training, NLP and hypnotherapy. So I ended up moving to Italy to help my mum and get my stepfather into treatment. And that was about 31. And then when I came back, I thought, oh God, I can't go back into media. And I'd always been interested in the human mind and body, funnily enough.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, what's the quickest and easiest thing I can do? And so I trained as a personal trainer, and I got a job in a gym.
I'm learning all sorts of new stuff.
I know,
today.
honestly, I think I must have done every job under the sun. Honestly, if you could go through the alphabet, I'm sure I've done most of them. And so I worked in a gym in Oxfordshire, and then I did my NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. So I did all of that. Then I did clinical hypnotherapy training. And then even then I thought, it's not quite enough. So I went and trained for 6 months at the Priory in Bristol and did an addictions therapy course, still drinking.
Yeah.
To get back to my hotel, my little half bottles, pour them out and think, well, I'm only having 2, that's all right. But still there was that underneath. And then I thankfully got my job, and then a year later woke up and thought, well, thank you, Jane, for your assessment, because that was finally and I would say that the first year probably for me of being alcohol free was really, really difficult, if I'm honest, because I was at the Priory, I was listening to life stories every day, and all of my stuff was coming up all over the place. And so if anybody's listening who was one of my clients in that first year, 20 years ago, or however long, I'm really sorry. But yeah, that was the journey to then. About 3 or 4 years later at the Priory, we started to bring in a woman that did something called a trauma egg. And so trauma started to be mentioned rather than just addiction, rather than just addiction treatment. Oh, were you actually? And then I think I found out about the ACE study, which is the Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale. And I looked at it and I went, bloody hell, I've got 5 or 6 of those. Oh, maybe there's something going on here. So it wasn't until I was a therapist that I knew about trauma, and I'd been in addiction for a while, that it suddenly started to dawn on me, oh my God, it's trauma that underpins all of this.
And it's interesting that you said that you were at that point, you didn't even realize that you'd had trauma. Was that because you think that was it because you just thought that doesn't count as trauma, or was it because it was disassociation, or a bit of both?
No, I wasn't about, it was about minimizing, really. It was about minimizing that my sexual abuse wasn't as bad as everybody else's because it was a woman. And my rape wasn't as bad as everybody else's rape because I was on Rohypnol, and therefore I didn't remember it. And what I realized actually is that it doesn't matter whether you remember or not, the body remembers, So it's us discounting all of our stories. And also for anybody listening, people think that trauma is some one-off massive event like a tsunami or a rape or a war, but it's not. That's not how we define trauma, and when I learned that trauma is more not about your level one-off big events, but is more your level 2, 3, and 4. Well, a level 2, 3, and 4 trauma, a level 2 is about lack of connection or attunement from your primary caregivers, that you don't feel held, or you don't feel safe, or you don't feel witnessed in some way. And then level 3 is about the parental introject, so your parents and their trauma and what they might not have worked through yet. And then 4, you've got the transgenerational trauma or the cultural societal. And so it started to make sense. Well, my mum's a Barnardo's kid, and was completely cut off emotionally until about 10 years ago. So it started to make sense. I had birth trauma and was left in an incubator for the first month in hospital alone, and you start adding all of these things up, and, near deaths and near drowning and falling through plate glass windows and being bullied and called names, and you add it all up, and it's kind of it's difficult, isn't it? Because so many of us compare, oh, well, it's not as bad, and I'm not this and I'm not that. But it's not. We can't compare ourselves to anybody else. We've got to look at our own internal sense of overwhelm and what that trauma, how that affected us internally. It's not the external event, and we think of trauma as a lack of regulation, of an inability to be soothed, to be held through whatever that we're going through. And so, I think it's really important with clients that I work with that they understand about level 2, level 3, level 4, and they understand what trauma really is, and that addiction is a response to trauma. We're trying to change our nervous systems because they feel so dysregulated because of all that's happened in usually our first 10, 15 years of life.
Yeah, and I think, obviously this is why I was drawn to your work initially, right? Because of my own trauma story. And we have had conversations around this of, when I as we used to call it, big T, small t trauma, of someone that has experienced, one of the big events. There was that kind of moment. Well, hang on, how can I attach to my own experiences if everyone's traumatized? Because, how do I hold on to the importance of what happened to me? And you really helped me to kind of this concept of comparing, and this concept of understanding that it's not about the event, it's about how it impacts your nervous system. But not only that, it's the cumulative effect. Because again, I was doing that self-denial for myself. So it's like I attach all of it to this one event, to this one evening, and I'm denying all the other things. I'm denying the bullying, I'm denying the feeling neglected, I'm denying feeling unheard, I'm denying all these other things of stress or the burnout, and because it's all connected to this one thing. So it's been a really, and we hear it a lot in our community and from women. It's like, well, I haven't had that happen to me, so I don't understand why, you know, I've got a problem with alcohol. And it's like, yeah,
but we've all had it a bit, and you know, I'm not blaming parents here and anybody that is a parent, but you know, it's very hard as parents or human beings to be in what I call our adult self, or our ventral vagal. If we take it from a polyvagal perspective, you know, when we're in green and in flow, we've got our social engagement system turned on, and we are able to attune and connect to others. And really, a parent's main job is to stay in ventral vagal. Because when we've got our social engagement system on and we're attuning, we can attune to our young. We can hear them. They feel connected. They feel soothed. Now, any bit of stress, any bit of upset, any bit of COVID and not being paid, anything like that takes us out of our ventral vagal into sympathetic. We're already activated, and our social engagement starts to, you know, we're on our phones, or we're not looking, or we're not hearing, or, you know, that's life. Life is really stressful. I'm not blaming anybody here, but children pick up on that because our main job is to be the scaffold to our children's nervous systems in the first 7 years of life. The first 3, the most important, the next 4, equally almost as important, but slightly less. And if they get that foundation of nervous system attunement from their primary caregivers in the first 7 years, we've got a good foundation. If we don't get that, well, we were talking about earlier before we went live about, you know, food and all the rest of it. Well, I wrote a food diary at the age of 6, how I was going to have lunch and what spam fritters and stuff I was looking forward to at school. Makes me want to vomit now, spam fritters. But, you know, I was already writing down, this is how I'm going to soothe myself at the age of 6.
Yeah.
You know.
And I think, like, because obviously I know a lot of our listeners are mums, and I'm a mum myself, and part of my drinking cycle was around the impact that I'd already potentially had on my kids. And
it's never too late to repair. Let me just say, it's never too late to repair. It doesn't matter how old those children are. You can do the repair work now. My mum and I are repairing still, and she's 79 and I'm 54. It's never too late to do the repairing.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing that I was like, you know, that I want people to hear, you know, is that, you know, when you are that chain breaker, when you make that decision, when you decide, you know, for me, and that was such a huge motivator to change my relationship with alcohol, was that, look, all of these things are interconnected. I am my mother's daughter. She is her mother's daughter. We are all, you know, and men have a part in this too. You know, your primary caregiver, the person that you feel safe attachment with, doesn't have to be your mum. It has to be someone. But also, like, it's never too late to repair. And be that person for them, and, you know, connect and create those strong bonds. And again, some people might never have that with their mum or their dad, but that doesn't mean they're never going to have it with somebody. You know?
Exactly. And then we become the transitional characters, don't we? You know, and those around us feel much safer with us, because actually it's all about safety, really.
Yeah. And as you were saying before, you know, for you, recovery is love, essentially.
Yes. Yeah, totally.
So what helped you in the beginning to enter recovery and change your behavior? Did you use groups? Did you?
I did a bit. I did use some 12-step groups. I never used AA, but I used CODA, and I used ACOA, and actually I used UA because I was a chronic under-earner.
Oh, I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah.
I'm like writing it down. Interesting.
Yeah,
Let me check
yeah.
that one out.
Well, I think we have trauma in lots of different areas, and it's not just looking at the one thing, is it? It's looking at the variation. I think I was really lucky in that, because I was already a therapist and in an addictions unit working, not should have been there as a patient, but I already had all of those people around me. And then loads of my friends were sober. So I already had a really good sober network. And actually lots of people that came into my life weren't drinking or were in recovery. So I think it was that. I think it was carrying on doing the work. And I think it was the impetus that, I'd seen addiction at its worst, really. I used to have to take my stepfather to AA meetings in Florence and drive him in Italy, and drive him up motorways and stuff, where every bar we would stop and he would have to down a pint and be in tears. And I just think, having that kind of image in my head, and also the fact that I knew that I wanted to do the work on myself and become a transitional character. And I knew that I wanted to go towards this mad vision that I'd had in my psychosis at 24. And I never would do it if I was still drinking, because I was just going to keep hating on myself. So those were really strong motivations for me.
So you mentioned codependency, and I know, well, some people might not know what it is or how that, because it's often a part of the conversation, part of the journey to change. Or so can you explain a little bit how that manifested for you?
Yes. So codependency really is about putting somebody else's needs above and before your own, and almost trying to control what people think of you as well, because you get your whole sense of validation or lovability through how people see you or judge you. So, as a codependent for years, I couldn't say no to people. It's a complete please, appease pattern where you don't really have boundaries. Everything that you do is for other people. You worry about other people. And my codependency was primarily with my mum. So because, as I mentioned earlier, because she was a Barnardo's kid and didn't have her own parents and her own family, and I knew about her history, I think quite young, it became my job, or I took it on far too early, to do that caregiving role and to look after her. So I felt responsible for my mother rather than the mother being responsible for the child. And so a lot of my journey of recovery has been about trying to put my codependency down, which is interesting because, God, I'm going to make a sweeping generalization now. Most coaches and therapists that I've met are codependent to a certain point. Otherwise, why would you do the job?
Yeah.
So I think it's about letting the codependency go enough that we are the mirror for people, but we are not responsible about whether they do the work or not. And actually, whether they do the work or they don't do the work, or how they act, doesn't mean anything about us. And that's been the hardest recovery for me, has been the codependency, because it's not black or white. For me, drinking, I just don't drink. I mean, there's no, that I don't even think about drinking, nor would I. I mean, the first 2 or 3 Christmases were a bit odd, but then after that,
yeah. But codependency,
it can still come back in.
Yeah. It's learning that the difference of where you end and others begin. And where you cross over from an interdependent relationship to a dependent relationship, isn't it? And
it's
that
about
need.
boundaries too, isn't it? And
Yeah.
about, you know, how porous your boundaries are, and, you know, how much you see yourself as separate to or part of.
Yeah.
So, you know, if my mum used to raise an eyebrow at me in the early days, or look at me sternly, you know, that inner child and that codependent part would be absolutely terrified, you know, or to even question her or challenge her or say no. And now, thank God, it's equal, and I can say, you know, I don't agree with that, or, you know, have you thought about this? I wouldn't have dreamt of doing that 20 years ago.
And I do think we talk about, Kate and I, you know, it's basically all boundaries. Like, you know, all our work and, you know, the constant forever work will be around boundaries and checking in with that and going, oh dear, something, you know, whoops, got myself in a pickle again, you know, where's my boundaries? What does that look like? Because, and I think, you know, the majority of women in our community and probably listen to this podcast can resonate with that thing of getting to a point where they were so overwhelmed and somewhat resentful or hugely resentful of where they were in their life, that they outsource them, you know, their feelings and their emotions to alcohol, you know. And for me, you know, motherhood, work, all of those things, you know, it was just like I felt so out of control because I didn't have any boundaries and I didn't know what they were. That I felt, you know, angry and lonely, you know, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, 100%, all of those most of the time. And so alcohol was the resource that I used to numb that out or to cope with that.
Whereas actually finding a voice and putting in boundaries and saying it like it is and not being a martyr, you know, on any level, leads us not into persecution.
Absolutely.
You know, because if we're being, you know, if we're doing everything for everybody all the time and we're not saying it like it is, oh my God. And, you know, I remember, and I often say to clients actually, you know, a really good codependent will never feel angry because they've never felt angry. They don't even know what anger is. I mean, I think it took me about 5 years of sobriety until I actually felt angry. And I was like, oh my God, what is it? I didn't even know.
What do I do with it? And I don't think, especially as women, we are allowed space to feel anger. I was definitely having a conversation with a client about that today. It's just like, look, you know, let's get that out. You know,
to be angry, you know, it's a really necessary, well, I always say to people, it's one of the 5 survival strategies. You know, so if our survival strategies are to fight, flee, flight, to freeze, to flop, to friend, codependency is friend, please appease. Oh, please be my friend. Please be nice to me. Please don't bully me. Don't have a go. That was me constantly. Flop is our depression, give up, submit, helpless, hopeless, powerless. Freeze is, well, we know what freeze is. Just don't do anything. Flight, we run away from it. Fight is and actually, I think it's quite good to be fluid and get our fight back, especially if we've been pleaser-peasers. You know, because the energy then is active. It's not passive.
And that when we're looking at the nervous system, that's coming at, isn't it? Is that the balance and the dance that we want between activation, deactivation, being able to then stay in, like, you know, in the green,
tolerance,
in the window of tolerance. We need both. We need to be able to do that dance, which is what is so great about all of this and all the knowledge is then it's hugely empowering, right? Isn't it? Because it's like, no, I'm not this thing, or I'm not a label. It's I am a traumatized nervous system, and I've been outsourcing to something or many things, multiple things,
to stimulate or depress my nervous system,
and
sometimes both and sometimes one or the other,
Yeah.
Or sometimes I'm more hypo and down and powerless, so I need an upper.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm like over anxious and a bit manic and I need a downer.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it just gets like, it's quite fun play, right? It's like, okay, so what do I do when I need an upper? It's like, listen to disco, you know. What do I need when I need a downer? Cuddle my dog. And it's like, and you become skillful at that toolkit for yourself.
Yeah.
Which leads me on to, what's in your toolkit? What are the things that you sort of lean upon to help you to manage your trauma and your,
Well, I suppose over the last 15 years, I've lent a lot on continued professional development and growth. So even this afternoon, I'm having an EMDR session with my therapist. I'm working on another channel. And I don't believe that it's a destination. I believe it's a journey, and I constantly work with my nervous system. I think it was about 7 or 8 years ago that I got into a position where I could shake and discharge and let trauma up myself. And I think that's quite a nice place to be in, where you can notice what's going on in the body, however it feels, and stay with it and be able to discharge it. So I've used so many things, man. I mean, meditation, binaural beats, which is the kind of hollow sync stuff, to my nutrition's quite good. I walk every day with the dog. I've let go of like really hardcore anaerobic punishing. All of what I do now is about self-care and is coming from a place of love, not punishment. Even down to my food choices.
But I think that's such a key, like, because we can get so overwhelmed with it, can't we? And again, get into this like toxic positivity of like, right now I need to fix this, or I should be doing this, or whatever. But when you bring it down to that that is it a decision of love, not punishment?
Yeah, then
that's
simple,
so simple, but so helpful, because I mean, that was, for me, it was just like that when I made that connection of like, I am, my brain is fragile, I am a bit fragile.
That's an interesting belief to have.
Yes.
Who told you your brain was fragile?
Well,
because you know that your brain is really neuroplastic and is growing and developing all the time.
Yeah, I guess what I connected with that was that like that I've been through some things, that I'd experienced some things. And so, at that point I was very connected, talking about my mental health and my depression and things like that. So it's like, okay, man, your brain is a bit fragile. So always choose the things that are going to look after you rather than hurt you. And so when it was like that, it was like, well, alcohol's never going to be something that helps my brain.
No.
So
anything toxic is not really going to help the brain, is it? But I think we can be a bit all or nothing. I think we can be a bit black or white. And how I put it is, we've got our real adult selves, haven't we? Which is kind of our present moment selves. And then I always say to people and me, I've got my critical parent and I've got my not okay child. And my critical parent is like my teenage adapted self, and it going, you should look this, you should be whatever, you're not doing that, okay. And then my not okay child is like that, oh, don't be up on me, don't. And more the feelings or the felt sense that's in the body. So I'm always saying to people, you might have two polarities of like your all or nothing. And depending on how they're wired up, most of our decisions, I think, if they come from the middle path, are kind of the kinder decisions to make in recovery. Because maybe the adult is more the window of tolerance. I always think of the not okay child a bit as the hypoarousal.
Yeah.
Toxic positivity is all like, oh, stay in your adult and be grateful and write out your gratitude list and don't go into your past and don't, oh, you shouldn't be feeling that. It's kind of a little bit, I don't know, I find it a bit hard. Whereas if I know that we've all got an internal critical parent that has a go at us, and we've all got not okay children, I always think when we're feeling emotional, let's stay and love the child and stay with the feelings and be curious about the feelings, a bit like that child were our own child, because that's the recovery journey, isn't it? It's reclaiming those parts of us that we've previously disowned, disavowed, hated, not liked,
shamed.
Yeah, all of that.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah. So tell us about Trauma Thrivers. Tell us about your work. Tell us about, if people are resonating with this, then what can they do to sort of...
Well, they can come and join us in the Facebook group, of which you and Kate, you've been a couple of times.
I have,
Thursday Night Lives. Thank you. We try and do a Thursday night live every week with somebody else, or Mel, who helps me run the Trauma Thrivers group. And we're kind of a mixture of clinicians and survivors, really. So it's quite a diverse mixture in there, but everybody is very welcome. And my goal or aim, or what I would love to do eventually, is to write a trauma-informed recovery voyage that's affordable and accessible for all, because I don't know about you, I just don't think there's enough affordable treatment options out there, and it upsets me that people can't access help. But that's quite a big project, if I'm honest with you. I'm going to try and make it a monthly membership program and kind of charge £49 a month and take people through the whole stabilization, psychoed, and then the processing, and then the integration online, which is interesting. But in the meantime, I'm working on something called Thrivability.
Oh, I love it.
Do you?
Yeah.
So it's your ability to survive trauma and then step into that thriving space. Because honestly, I know that our journeys and books and programs shouldn't really be just about us, but honestly, I had such a bloody job thriving.
Yeah.
You know, my version of thriving, in that I couldn't be visible and put myself out there on podcasts or even social media. I couldn't find a voice. I couldn't speak up. I couldn't speak from stage. I was terrified. My value and valuable was really low, so I couldn't earn, really. I hated couldn't ask for any money that was owed to me. One is validation, which is about being validated always by other people rather than self-validated. And the other V is vision. So you've got to kind of have a vision and have something to go for. So I'm going to run all of these V's really first as small groups.
Amazing.
For maybe 10 or 12 people, very affordable. And I'm going to take them through the different V's from surviving to thriving trauma. I'm probably starting that sometime early 2022.
Amazing.
So it's really looking at self-worth, self-care, self-esteem, self-value. Yeah, so that kind of aspect, that's what I'm really keen on. And self-belief. Yeah. I don't know about you, but that was a toughie for me.
Yeah, that validation from, and again, it's like, because when people are like, oh yeah, but I don't have trauma, and then it's like, it's traumatic to be a woman in the sense of not feeling validated in your own experience, or having yourself gaslighted from a very young age, or having to, your body being unattractive, or your teeth bit not being right, like all of those things, things are impacting your nervous system in the sense of I'm not good enough as I am.
Exactly.
So
we're not free to thrive, because if we think something's wrong with us all the time, or we don't, I did a meme ages ago, too fat, too old, too ugly. you know, and I told myself that for years.
Yeah.
You know, you can't put yourself out there because you're too old, you're too fat, and you're not attractive enough. Look at her. And, you know, we've got to stop doing that to ourselves in this Instagram culture.
Yeah.
You're never too old. You're never too anything. You're just you.
Yeah. And your gift is you.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And celebrating that.
Yeah. And I do think it's that part of it, you know, that validation, looking outside of yourself with validation is so important but it's hard.
Yeah, it is. I think that's the hardest thing, isn't it? Because we are in a culture that compares everybody and everything. We're in an Instagram age where, you know, we're in an age where, you know, we date people on telly from the feet up.
Yes.
And, you know, like, how is that even possible?
Yeah. It's so true.
On personality and, you know, what you were like and your values. I mean, bring back Blind Date and the screen, dear old filler. You know, that was my age. Not, you know, what your legs and feet and other parts of your anatomy look like.
Yeah.
Just gone a bit mad.
Yeah, it's so true.
You know, so I just think it's hard, isn't it, to really have that level of self-value and worth and esteem in this day and age.
And so what would be your access point? You know, if people are like, okay, great, blah, 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 but I can't do it. So what would be your first access point or a first tip or tool to start to value yourself, or, you know?
Put down the booze first up. If you're listening to this and you're not sober yet and you still feel that you're using it or it's a crutch, I don't think you can get to self-worth or self-like or even self-love, if I use that expression, until you've got a relationship with yourself where you begin to trust yourself.
Yeah, it starts with trust, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I think that is the most important step. And I think from sobriety comes so many other things. Comes a much deeper connection to ourselves. And if we have that deeper connection to ourselves, we can start to really connect to other people. You know, and that we don't need booze then. Why would you or I ever drink again?
Yeah.
Just like the thought horrifies me. Doesn't even impress me. You know, but then we've probably cleared out our bodies and the trauma and done enough work on ourselves that we can ride the waves. You know.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's that ability to develop capacity.
Yes.
Which is the toolkit, you know.
Yeah, it doesn't happen overnight, does it? It takes, you know, it does take work. I'm not going to lie to anybody and say it's a quick 6-step process, because it's not.
Yeah. But it's worth it.
Bloody worth it in the end. It really, really is.
And also I just remembered that, of course, we're doing Simon Chappell's event together.
We are doing Simon Chappell's event
so that's
on January the 2nd.
Yes.
Lucky we're not going out on New Year's Eve, isn't it?
I know. Yeah. So if you'd like to see Lou speak, and Kate and I and Simon Chappell and Sober Dave and William Porter, and I am forgetting people, I think.
Emily.
Oh, and Emily Cyphus, Sober and Social, and I believe
Annie Grace joining.
She's
on Zoom.
Joining on Zoom, I believe, to do a live Q&A. And I think one of the This Naked Mind coaches is from America, is flying over as well. I'll put the link on the bio notes about that event, which is super exciting.
You know what you're speaking about yet, you and Kate?
I can't remember. I do, but I've got to finish a book first. That's like next year.
Have you? Oh wow, God.
We've got the second book deadline at the end of November, so my brain is like can't quite.
No, exactly.
But it will be amazing, whatever we're talking about.
Yeah, of course it will. Of course it will. What is it? Soberlive.co.uk, the website?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. But yeah, I'll put it on the show notes. So we always finish the podcast with a tip of the day and your reason for love being sober. So what would be your tip of the day?
Oh God. Stay with it.
Oh, I love it.
Stay with it. I'm only saying that because I was thinking about the Soberfest and what the song is that we had to come on stage with. And the one that I've picked at the moment is Miley Cyrus's It's a Climb. And I think that too often we're sold this, you know, you can do it in this amount of steps or this amount of, and actually it's a daily enjoying the journey, enjoying the climb, knowing that each layer and each level and each bit that you get through, however hard, is going to take you somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, and I know that my psychosis was a bit of a mad thing to end with, but, you know, my final vision in my spiritual awakening psychosis was standing on stage with Oprah Winfrey and the Dalai Lama. I mean, God knows where that came from. God knows, you know, and at 20 odd or 30 odd or even 40 odd, that would never, ever, ever have even resonated with any self-esteem, self-belief. That me, you've got to be joking. Now I can kind of see it.
Yes.
I can kind of feel it. And it's not actually about them. No. It's not even about them. It's about the symbol of what it means, that we think highly enough of ourselves, that we can imagine ourselves being of value or free to do the things that we really dream about doing. So I would say to everybody, hold that vision, but keep knowing it's a climb, it's a journey, it's not a destination, and try and enjoy it.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And it's Kate, one of her visions is having dinner with Oprah Winfrey. Yeah, she's like,
you
one day.
Know. Yeah,
but it's that aspirational, right? It's that thing of like, actually there's value, there's meaning, and you know, and it's just a symbol.
Yes.
You know, and whatever that attaches to, but it's keeping that, you know, within you of just like that my life has meaning, and I'm, you know, and I'm worth more than what alcohol is giving me, which is false, and it's a plaster, you know. It's a temporary kind of solution, but it's not, you're not healing in any way.
No, you got to take the plaster off to do the healing.
Yeah. And so what's your reason to love being sober today?
What's my reason to love being sober today? Because I get to do what I love. I get to have a job and a career that I want to get out of bed each day for, that I enjoy each day, and that I can grow and develop and keep doing what I want to do, hopefully, please God, for the next 20 years of my life. And I couldn't do any of that if I was drinking.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Lou. This has been wonderful and hugely inspiring. So yeah, if you're listening and you want to hear more about what Lou gets up to, you know, please do join the Trauma Thrivers group. It's free and it's a wonderful space. And as Lou said, you know, there's a mixture of practitioners and people, you know, who have had experiences with trauma. So it's a really kind of beautiful mix of collaboration and healing together, you know. And what I love is that kind of taking away the hierarchy of it. You know, it's we're all on the same level, with our experiences. And if you're, you know, immediately concerned about your drinking, please do reach out, you know, send us a message at info@lovesober.com, or, you know, look on Alcohol Change. They have really brilliant resources. You know, speak to your GP. Reach out to, you know, someone that you resonate with on Instagram or in a sober group. You know, we're there to sort of support you, so don't be alone, because you're not. And we'll see you next week for more chats. So thanks so much, Lou, and take care, everybody.
Thanks everyone, take care.